The rusted metal door of the abandoned warehouse groaned as Maya-chan pushed it open, the sound echoing through the cavernous space beyond. Cigarette smoke and the acrid smell of sweat hit her immediately, mixing with the metallic tang of blood that seemed permanently embedded in the concrete walls. She paused at the threshold, her small frame silhouetted against the harsh fluorescent lights that cast everything in an unforgiving white glare. Jesus Christ, what is that? Someone shouted from the crowd, followed by a wave of raucous laughter that rolled through the packed arena like thunder. Maya's shoulders hunched forward as she clutched her worn gym bag tighter against her chest. Her oversized hoodie hung loose on her petite frame, making her appear even smaller than her actual 5'12" height. She wore faded jeans with holes at the knees and beat-up sneakers that had seen better days. Everything about her screamed amateur, from her nervous fidgeting to the way she kept glancing around like a lost tourist. The underground fighting arena had been carved out of the warehouse's main floor, with makeshift bleachers rising on all sides around a regulation boxing ring. Nearly 300 spectators packed the space, their faces illuminated by the glow of smartphones recording every moment. Money changed hands constantly as bookies worked the crowd, shouting odds and taking bets on the evening's main event. "Look at this little girl," bellowed Tommy, the shark Marconi, the arena's primary bookie, his gold teeth glinting as he grinned. "She must be lost. Someone call her mommy." The crowd erupted again, pointing and jeering as Maya made her way down the narrow aisle between the bleachers. She stumbled slightly on the uneven concrete, catching herself against a spectator's knee. The man shoved her away roughly, causing her to lose her grip on her gym bag. The contents spilled across the floor in a cascade of embarrassment. Amateur boxing gloves with frayed laces, protein bars from the discount grocery store, a crumpled water bottle, and what appeared to be a self-help book titled Confidence for Beginners. A tampon rolled across the concrete, coming to rest near someone's boot. "Oh my God, she's serious!" a woman shrieked from the upper bleachers. "She actually thinks she's going to fight." Maya dropped to her knees, frantically gathering her belongings while her face burned red with apparent humiliation. Her hands shook as she stuffed everything back into the bag, the crowd's laughter growing louder with each passing second. Someone threw a crumpled beer can that bounced off her shoulder. "This has got to be a joke," muttered Jake Morrison, the arena's veteran announcer, into his headset microphone. "I've seen some mismatches in my 20 years doing this, but nothing like this. The girl looks like she weighs maybe 110 pounds soaking wet." High above the arena floor, in a VIP booth constructed from shipping containers welded together, Victor the Mountain Kozlov watched the spectacle with growing amusement. At 6 feet 8 inches and 280 pounds of solid muscle, he was an imposing figure even while seated. His massive hands, each the size of dinner plates, rested casually on the booth's railing as he sipped from a bottle of premium vodka. "Boss, you sure about this?" asked his manager, a nervous man named Eddie Torino, who constantly wiped sweat from his bald head. "I mean, what if she gets seriously hurt? The commission's already breathing down our necks about safety violations." Victor's laugh was a deep rumble that seemed to emanate from somewhere in his chest. "Look at her, Eddie. She is like little bird that has flown into cage with lion. This will be over before it begins." His Russian accent made every word sound like a threat. "The crowd wants blood, and I will give them blood. Just not mine." What neither Victor nor the jeering crowd noticed was the subtle precision in Maya's movements as she collected her scattered belongings. Her eyes, hidden beneath the hood of her sweatshirt, swept the arena with methodical efficiency. She cataloged every exit, the main entrance she'd come through, 2 emergency doors flanking the ring, and a service entrance near the VIP section. She noted the positions of the security cameras, counting at least 12 different angles covering the arena floor. More importantly, She memorized faces. The three men in expensive suits sitting ringside who weren't laughing with the rest of the crowd. The woman with the Bluetooth earpiece who kept checking her phone instead of watching the show. The maintenance worker who'd been mopping the same spot for the past 10 minutes, while keeping his eyes on the ring dot as Maya finally stood up. Bag clutched against her chest, a figure emerged from the shadows near the service entrance. He was tall and lean, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his pale blue eyes held an intelligence that seemed to cut through the chaos around him like a blade. He raised a phone to his ear, speaking in a voice too quiet to be heard over the crowd's noise. "The asset is in position," he said, his words crisp and precise. "All variables accounted for. Proceed to Phase 2. The man's name was Alexander Petrov, though that wasn't the name on any of his identification documents. He'd been planning this moment for 6 months, ever since his organization had identified Viktor Kozlov as a problem that needed to be eliminated. The mountain's connections to certain Eastern European crime syndicates had made him a liability, but his death needed to appear accidental. A freak occurrence in an underground fight would raise no suspicions. Maya Chan, or rather, the woman using that identity, was the perfect solution. Officially, she didn't exist. No birth certificate, no social security number, no digital footprint of any kind. She was a ghost who specialized in making other people disappear, and her small stature made her the ideal candidate for this particular assignment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake Morrison's voice boomed through the arena's sound system, cutting through the crowd's chatter. "In just 15 minutes, we'll witness what might be the most lopsided fight in underground boxing history. In the red corner, weighing in at a devastating 280 pounds and standing 6 feet 8 inches tall, the undefeated, undisputed champion of the underground circuit, Viktor the Mountain Kozlov." The crowd exploded in cheers as Viktor stood up in his booth, raising his massive arms above his head. His chest was bare except for an intricate tattoo of a Russian bear that seemed to move as his muscles flexed. Scars crisscrossed his torso like a roadmap of violence, each one telling the story of a battle survived. "And in the blue corner," Morrison continued, his voice dripping with barely concealed disbelief, "weighing in at, well, we're not exactly sure, but probably somewhere around 110 pounds, making her professional debut tonight, Maya Chan." The announcement was met with a mixture of laughter and boos. Someone in the crowd started chanting, "Refund, refund," while others began placing increasingly ridiculous bets on how quickly the fight would end. Maya stood at the base of the ring steps, looking up at the squared circle that would soon become her stage. She appeared to take a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the bottom rope, and for a moment, she looked exactly like what everyone believed her to be, a scared young woman who was in way over her head. But in the shadows, Alexander Petrov checked his watch and smiled. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. Maya climbed through the ropes with deliberate clumsiness, catching her foot on the middle strand and nearly tumbling face first onto the canvas. The crowd's laughter reached a crescendo as she windmilled her arms to regain balance, her oversized hoodie riding up to reveal a faded tank top underneath. She looked around the ring with wide, frightened eyes, as if only now realizing the magnitude of what she'd gotten herself into. Viktor the Mountain Kozlov descended from his VIP booth like a force of nature, each step on the metal stairs reverberating through the warehouse. His entourage followed behind him, Eddie Torino clutching a clipboard with shaking hands. 2 massive bodyguards who looked like they could bench press small cars, and a ring girl whose job tonight seemed more like a formality than a necessity. The champion's entrance was a carefully choreographed display of intimidation that had broken lesser fighters before they'd even thrown a punch. Victor stripped off his silk robe to reveal a physique that belonged in a museum dedicated to human physical perfection. Every muscle was defined with surgical precision, from his boulder-like shoulders down to his tree-trunk legs. The Russian bear tattoo on his chest seemed to snarl at the crowd as he flexed. "Look at the size difference," Jake Morrison shouted into his microphone, his voice barely audible over the crowd's roar. "This is like watching a chihuahua square off against a grizzly bear. I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of calling fights." Victor began his pre-fight ritual, a psychological warfare technique that had served him well throughout his undefeated career. He started by pounding his massive fists against his chest, the sound echoing through the arena like gunshots. The crowd responded with primal enthusiasm, feeding off the raw aggression radiating from the champion. "Rah!" Victor's roar shook the ring ropes as he threw his head back, veins bulging in his neck like steel cables. He grabbed the top rope and shook the entire ring structure, demonstrating the kind of raw power that had left 17 previous opponents unconscious on the canvas. Maya cowered in her corner, apparently overwhelmed by the display. She pressed herself against the turnbuckle padding, her hands covering her ears as if the noise was too much to bear. Several spectators in the front row began shouting for the fight to be called off, claiming it was inhumane to let it continue. But then something unexpected happened. A small giggle escaped from Maya's lips. At first, it was barely audible over the crowd noise, just a tiny sound that might have been mistaken for a sob. But as Victor continued his intimidation display, pounding his chest and flexing his massive arms, the giggle grew louder. And then louder still. Within seconds, Maya-chan was laughing, not the nervous, hysterical laughter of someone on the edge of a breakdown, but genuine, delighted amusement that rang clear and bright through the arena. The sound was so unexpected, so completely at odds with what everyone expected, that it cut through the crowd noise like a knife through silk. Victor stopped mid-roar, his massive arms still raised above his head, confusion replacing the savage confidence on his face. The crowd's energy shifted palpably, uncertainty rippling through the packed bleachers like a wave. Maya stepped away from the turnbuckle, her laughter continuing as she watched Victor's display. She began to clap slowly, mockingly, as if she were watching a particularly entertaining circus act. The fear had vanished from her eyes, replaced by something that looked disturbingly like amusement. "What the hell is she doing?" Eddie Torino whispered to one of Victor's bodyguards, his voice tight with confusion. Maya's laughter finally subsided, but the smile remained on her face as she began to mimic Victor's poses. She pounded her small fists against her chest, an exaggerated parody of his intimidation ritual, her tiny frame making the gesture look absurd. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or gasp as she threw her head back and let out a high-pitched roar that was clearly mocking the champion. "Rah!" Maya squeaked, her voice a comical contrast to Victor's bass rumble. She grabbed the ropes and shook them with theatrical effort, her entire body swaying with the motion while the ring barely moved. Victor's face darkened with rage. In his entire career, no opponent had ever dared to mock him. Fear was the foundation of his fighting style. Once an opponent was mentally broken, the physical victory was just a formality. But this tiny woman was turning his greatest weapon against him, making him look foolish in front of hundreds of witnesses. "You think this is funny, little girl?" Victor snarled, his accent thickening with anger. "I will show you what is funny when I break every bone in your pathetic body." Maya stopped her mimicry and tilted her head to one side, studying Victor with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab specimen. "You know," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet arena, "I've seen scarier things in children's cartoons." The crowd erupted in shocked gasps and nervous laughter. No one spoke to Viktor Kozlov that way and lived to tell about it. The champion's face turned purple with rage as he took a step toward Maya, his massive hands clenched into fists. "Victor, no!" Eddie Torino shouted from ringside. "Wait for the bell. Don't give them a reason to disqualify you." But Victor was beyond reason. The careful psychological preparation he'd built up over years of fighting was crumbling in the face of this tiny woman's complete lack of fear. He charged across the ring, protocol forgotten, intent on ending this humiliation immediately. Maya's response was to stumble backward, apparently caught off guard by his sudden movement. Her foot caught on something, perhaps a loose board in the canvas, and she tumbled sideways, arms windmilling wildly as she fell. Victor, committed to his charge and unable to stop his momentum, crashed headfirst into the turnbuckle where Maya had been standing just a moment before. The impact was tremendous. Victor's 280-pound frame hit the steel post with enough force to rattle the entire ring structure. He bounced off and staggered backward, shaking his head to clear the stars that were undoubtedly dancing in his vision. The crowd was on its feet, some laughing at the slapstick nature of what they just witnessed, others concerned that their champion might have just concussed himself before the fight had even officially begun. Maya picked herself up from the canvas, brushing off her clothes with an embarrassed smile. "Oops," she said, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Sorry about that. I'm kind of clumsy." But in the VIP section, Alexander Petrov was watching through a pair of high-powered binoculars, and he caught something the crowd missed. For just a fraction of a second, as Maya had stumbled, her movement had been perfectly controlled. Her foot hadn't caught on anything. She had deliberately positioned herself to make Victor's charge look foolish. More importantly, the security cameras positioned around the arena had captured her subtle smirk in the moment before she fell. This wasn't clumsiness. This was psychological warfare of the highest order. And Viktor Kozlov was losing a battle he didn't even realize he was fighting. Petrov lowered his binoculars and checked his watch. The official fight would begin in less than 60 seconds, and his asset had already begun dismantling the target's mental defenses. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. In the ring, Victor shook off the effects of his collision with the turnbuckle and glared at Maya with pure hatred. The mockery, the laughter, the apparent accident that had made him look like a fool, it was all building to a rage that would make him reckless when the bell finally rang, which was exactly what Maya-chan was counting on. The bell's sharp clang cut through the arena's tension like a blade, officially beginning what everyone expected to be the shortest fight in underground boxing history. Viktor the Mountain Kozlov exploded from his corner with the fury of a man whose pride had been systematically dismantled over the past 10 minutes. His massive frame moved with surprising speed for someone his size, closing the distance between himself and Maya in 3 thunderous strides. "Kill her!" Someone screamed from the crowd, the bloodlust palpable in the smoky air. Victor's right hand came around in a devastating haymaker that would have decapitated a normal opponent. The punch carried enough force to shatter concrete, his 280-pound frame putting every ounce of power behind the blow. The crowd held its collective breath, anticipating the sickening sound of impact that would end Maya-chan's brief and foolish fighting career. But the sound never came. In the split second before Victor's fist would have connected, Maya-chan underwent a transformation so complete and sudden that several spectators would later swear they'd witnessed some kind of supernatural event. The stumbling, nervous girl who had been cowering in the corner simply ceased to exist. Maya's entire body language shifted with fluid precision. Her hunched shoulders straightened into perfect posture. Her uncertain, shuffling gait became the balanced stance of a master martial artist. Most dramatically, her eyes, which had been wide with apparent fear just moments before, now held the cold, calculating focus of a predator who had been playing with her prey. Victor's massive fist whistled through empty, air as Maya moved with impossible grace, her body flowing like water around his attack. She didn't just dodge the punch, she redirected it, using Victor's own momentum against him with a subtle touch that sent him stumbling past her. What the hell? Jig Morrison's voice cracked over the sound system. Did you see that? How did she? The crowd's roar died in their throats as they witnessed something that defied everything they thought they knew about physics and fighting. Maya hadn't just avoided Victor's attack. She had made it look effortless, almost casual, like a matador stepping aside from a charging bull. Victor spun around, confusion replacing the rage on his scarred face. In 20 years of professional fighting, no one had ever made him miss so completely. He threw another punch, this one a left hook that should have caught Maya in the ribs and lifted her off her feet. Again. She wasn't there. Maya moved like smoke, her small frame seeming to bend the laws of physics as she flowed around Victor's attacks. Each punch he threw was perfectly timed, technically sound, and delivered with devastating power. Each punch found nothing but air. "This isn't possible," Eddie Torino whispered from ringside, his clipboard forgotten in his trembling hands. "Nobody moves like that. Nobody." In the VIP section, Alexander Petrov checked his stopwatch with the satisfaction of a man watching a perfectly executed plan unfold. 2 seconds had elapsed since the bell rang. Right on schedule, Maya's movements weren't random or defensive. She was studying Victor with the clinical precision of a surgeon preparing to make an incision. Every dodge, every step, every subtle shift of her weight was calculated to position Victor exactly where she needed him to be. The champion was growing desperate now, his carefully honed fighting technique deteriorating into wild swings as frustration overwhelmed his training. Sweat poured down his massive frame, despite the fight being less than 3 seconds old. His breathing was already labored, not from exertion, but from the psychological pressure of facing an opponent who seemed to exist outside the normal rules of combat. "Stand still and fight," Victor roared, launching himself forward in a final, desperate charge. This was the moment Maya had been waiting for. As Victor committed his full weight to the attack, Maya stepped inside his guard with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. Time appeared to slow as she positioned herself at the exact angle she needed, her right fist drawing back in preparation for a strike that would end everything. But this wasn't the wild, desperate punch of an amateur fighter. Maya's technique was flawless, her form textbook perfect, as she drove her small fist upward in an uppercut that targeted a specific point just behind Victor's left ear. The strike was delivered with surgical precision, hitting a nerve cluster that most people didn't even know existed. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Maya's tiny fist connected with Victor's massive head. The impact seemed almost gentle, like a child tapping an adult to get their attention. There was no dramatic sound effect, no visible explosion of force. Just a small woman's hand making contact with a giant skull. For a moment, nothing happened. Victor stood frozen in place, his eyes wide with confusion. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. His massive arms, which had been reaching for Maya just a second before, slowly dropped to his sides. Then his eyes rolled back in his head, showing only white. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered from the crowd. Victor, the Mountain Kozlov, the undefeated heavyweight champion of the underground circuit, began to fall. His 280-pound frame toppled backward like a felled redwood, his unconscious body completely limp as gravity took hold. The impact when he hit the canvas shook the entire ring structure. The sound echoed through the warehouse like a thunderclap, followed by the most complete silence anyone in the arena had ever experienced. Maya stood calmly in the center of the ring, her expression serene as she looked down at the unconscious champion. There was no celebration, no victory dance, no acknowledgement of the crowd. She simply stood there, as composed as if she'd just finished a light workout at the gym. The referee, a grizzled veteran named Mickey Santos, who had officiated hundreds of underground fights, stared at the scene in complete bewilderment. In 30 years of boxing, he had never seen anything like what had just occurred. He looked at his stopwatch, then at Victor's motionless form, then back at his stopwatch. 3 seconds. The entire fight had lasted exactly 3 seconds. 1. Mickey finally began his count, his voice barely audible in the stunned silence. 2. 3. Victor didn't move. His massive chest rose and fell with steady breathing, but his eyes remained closed, his body completely unresponsive. 4. 5. 6. In the VIP section, Alexander Petrov allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. The woman he knew as Asset 47 had performed exactly as expected. Viktor Kozlov would survive. The strike had been precisely calibrated to cause unconsciousness without permanent damage, but his reputation was finished. More importantly, certain betting syndicates that had been causing problems for Petrov's organization would lose millions of dollars tonight. 7. 8. 9. The crowd began to stir, whispers and gasps rippling through the bleachers as the reality of what they'd witnessed began to sink in. Cell phone cameras that had been recording what they expected to be a brutal beatdown had instead captured something that would be analyzed and debated for years to come. 10. Mickey Santos raised his hand and pointed at Maya, his voice cracking as he made the official announcement. Winner by knockout, Maya Chun. The arena erupted in chaos. Some spectators cheered, others booed, and many simply stood in shocked silence, trying to process what they'd just seen. Money changed hands frantically as bookies tried to figure out how to handle bets on a fight that had defied every prediction. But Maya Chun simply walked to the neutral corner and raised her hand in acknowledgement. Her expression as calm as if she'd just won a chess match rather than knocked out a man twice her size in 3 seconds flat. The arena remained frozen in stunned silence for several heartbeats after Mickey Santos's announcement. Then, like a dam bursting, chaos erupted from every corner of the warehouse. Spectators leaped to their feet, some screaming in disbelief, others frantically waving betting slips in the air. Cell phones emerged like a forest of glowing rectangles, everyone desperate to capture evidence of what they'd just witnessed. Replay, replay, chanted a section of the crowd, convinced they'd missed something crucial in those 3 seconds. Maya stood in the center of the ring, her hands still raised in victory, but her eyes were scanning the crowd with the same methodical precision she'd shown while collecting her scattered belongings earlier. What she saw made her blood run cold. In Section C, Row 12. A man in a Yankees cap was checking his phone with a satisfied smile, nodding as he read what appeared to be a payment confirmation. 3 rows behind him, a woman in designer sunglasses, despite being indoors at night, was speaking quietly into a Bluetooth earpiece. Her words lost in the crowd noise, but her body language suggesting she was reporting a successful mission. Near the emergency exit, the maintenance worker who'd been mopping the same spot for 20 minutes had abandoned his equipment and was walking purposefully toward the service entrance. His coveralls bore the logo of a cleaning company. But Maya noticed his shoes, expensive Italian leather that no janitor could afford. Most disturbing of all, scattered throughout the arena, Maya counted at least 30 people who weren't reacting to Victor's knockout with shock or surprise. They were checking their phones, collecting winnings, or simply sitting with the calm satisfaction of people whose expectations had been perfectly met. Ladies and gentlemen, Jake Morrison's voice boomed over the sound system, though his usual confidence was replaced by bewildered uncertainty. I honestly don't know what we just witnessed. In 20 years of calling fights, I've never seen anything like. His commentary was cut short as medical personnel rushed into the ring. Two paramedics knelt beside Victor's unconscious form, checking his pulse and shining a penlight into his unresponsive eyes. The champion's massive chest continued to rise and fall steadily, but he showed no signs of regaining consciousness. "He's stable," one of the paramedics announced to the crowd. "Pulse is strong, breathing is normal. Looks like a clean knockout, but we need to get him to a hospital for evaluation." Maya watched the medical team work, but her attention was divided. In her peripheral vision, she caught sight of Alexander Petrov making his way down from the VIP section, moving through the crowd with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to navigating chaos. He carried a sleek aluminum briefcase in his left hand, and his pale blue eyes were fixed directly on her. The realization hit Maya like a physical blow. This hadn't been a random underground fight. It had been an elaborate setup, a carefully orchestrated performance with herself as the unwitting star. Every detail had been planned, from her accidental discovery of the fight to Victor's psychological breakdown to the precise 3-second knockout that would generate maximum shock value. But why? And more importantly, who was pulling the strings? "Excuse me, Miss Chun?" Petrov's voice was cultured and precise, with just a hint of an accent that could have been Russian, German, or something else entirely. He'd somehow made it through the crowd and climbed into the ring without Maya noticing, a feat that should have been impossible given her training. "Congratulations on your victory," he continued, setting the briefcase down on the canvas between them. "Though I suspect you have questions about how you came to be here tonight." Maya's hand instinctively moved toward the small of her back, where a ceramic knife was concealed beneath her hoodie. The weapon was undetectable by metal detectors and sharp enough to slice through Kevlar. But something in Petrov's demeanor suggested that violence, while always an option, might not be necessary. "Who are you?" Maya asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Someone who appreciates exceptional talent," Petrov replied. "And someone who has been watching your career with great interest, Agent Chun. Or should I say, Agent 47. The use of her operational designation confirmed Maya's worst fears. Her cover identity as Maya Chun was supposed to be bulletproof, backed by years of carefully constructed documentation. If this man knew her real designation, then he had access to intelligence networks that operated at the highest levels of international espionage. "I don't know what you're talking about," Maya said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew that denial was pointless. Petrov smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. "3 months ago, you eliminated an arms dealer in Prague using a technique very similar to what we just witnessed. 2 months before that, a corrupt banker in Singapore suffered a fatal heart attack during his morning jog. The autopsy found nothing suspicious, but I know better." He gestured toward Victor's unconscious form. "Tonight's performance was merely a demonstration, a way to showcase your unique talents to a very select audience." Maya followed his gaze and noticed for the first time that several of the people who hadn't seemed surprised by the fight's outcome were now filming her with professional-grade cameras. Not cell phones, but expensive equipment with telephoto lenses and stabilization rigs. They weren't random spectators. They were documenting her capabilities for someone else's benefit. "The betting syndicate that lost money tonight," Petrov continued, "has been causing problems for certain business interests in Eastern Europe. Viktor Kozlov was their primary enforcer, and his reputation for invincibility was the foundation of their power structure. By destroying that reputation so publicly, you've effectively crippled their operations." The briefcase clicked open with a soft mechanical sound. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, were several items that made Maya's blood run cold. A Russian passport bearing her photograph but a different name. Airline tickets to Moscow departing in 6 hours. And most ominously, a thick manila folder containing surveillance photographs of a man she recognized from intelligence briefings. Dmitry Volkov, former KGB operative turned oligarch, currently wanted by Interpol for crimes ranging from human trafficking to nuclear smuggling. He was also, according to the intelligence community, completely untouchable due to his connections within the Russian government. "Your next assignment," Petrov said simply. "Mr. Volkov has been causing difficulties for my employers. He's scheduled to attend a charity gala in Moscow tomorrow evening. Very public, very secure, very challenging." Maya stared at the contents of the briefcase, her mind racing through the implications. She'd been manipulated into this situation, used as a weapon in someone else's war. But the alternative to cooperation was likely a bullet in the back of the head in some anonymous alley. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Petrov's smile widened slightly. "I think you'll find that your previous employer has already been informed of your freelance activities. Your handler, Agent Morrison, received a very detailed report about your unauthorized operations approximately 10 minutes ago. I'm afraid your old life is no longer an option." The sound of sirens grew louder outside the warehouse as emergency vehicles arrived to transport Victor to the hospital. The crowd was beginning to disperse, but the cameras continued rolling, documenting every moment of Maya's conversation with the mysterious man in the expensive suit. "You have 30 minutes to decide," Petrov said, closing the briefcase and sliding it across the canvas toward her. "The car waiting outside will take you to the airport, or it will take you somewhere considerably less pleasant. The choice, as they say, is yours." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd with the same effortless grace he'd shown while approaching. Maya was left alone in the ring with an unconscious heavyweight champion, a briefcase full of forged documents, and the growing realization that her 3-second knockout had just triggered something far more dangerous than a simple fight. The conspiracy was deeper than she'd imagined, and she was no longer just a participant. She was the weapon they intended to use to reshape the criminal underworld of Eastern Europe.